This is a video about difficult keyways, pick thickness, and what I think is more important, pick profiles. So what are the different profiles and what are they good for? Two of the most common ones are flat and round. And flat is just like it sounds like, the tip is cut flat. This is really nice for stability, tend to work really well for new pickers. It's really stable profile. When trying to get the pick under the point of the key pin, a flat tip makes it easier to find it. Your pick position can vary a fair bit front to back and still make contact with the tip of the key pin. One of the drawbacks is that the sharp edges can catch on the edge of warding. So every pin is going to be in a pin chamber. So there will be material between each pin chamber. So in the same way that it's easier for the flat of the pick to make contact with the round part of the key pin, it's also easier to catch the edge of the chamber. It can sometimes be difficult to determine if you're on the warding or if it's simply a pin that's binding. I do think it's a really good basic profile and really helpful for when you're starting out. I will still use flats and locks that will let me, and I even bought some new ones. I'm going to skip to the other end of the extreme and talk about pointed. And it's just like what it sounds like. The tips come to a sharp point. It affects not only the width of the very tip, but it affects the height of the shaft back here. And we can see that when comparing two number 4s. So that's number 4 flat, this is the number 4 pointed. And there's a bit of a scallop here. So this has a very thin cross section all through here, whereas this one is a bit wider. There will be some locks where that becomes useful. And the tip itself is nice for precision work. Once you have a better feel for what's going on inside the lock, you can feel for the tip of the pin. And with a pointed like this, it's easier to work either the front or the back of the pin. So if you want to be very precise about where you're placing the pressure on the pin, a pointed tip will help you do that. One of the drawbacks is that the tip can actually get stuck. So if you apply pressure a little too far to the side, you can end up wedging it in between the tip of the key pin and the wall of the chamber. You'll just feel stuck and you'll actually have to pull it to get it back out. Pointed tips also have less material, so they will be weaker and easier to bend. And then in between flat and pointed, we have rounded. They have some characteristics of each, and like somewhere in between the two, depending on the specific profile of that brand. And we can see the difference here in the tips. They have about a similar distance between the top of the shaft and the top of the tip, but the curve is a little more extreme on the Tool and Covert Instruments ones, and a little shallower on the Jimy Longs. And for brands that offer a full range of their profiles, you'll end up with something like this, where the number 1 is fairly shallow, 2 is a little more deep, 3 is a little bit deeper yet, and 4 is the deepest. And often the radius becomes a little more extreme on the deeper hooks. You can see that on the Moki as well, where the difference between number 3 and number 4 is not only deeper, but a tighter radius. The depth difference is actually very minimal, but it is a tighter curve. And they'll have different use situations, depending on what type of warding you're trying to get around and how deep into the lock you're trying to get. You're able to work your way into the pin chamber like so, which allows you a bit more height. But if you don't have that kind of movement with a number 4, you're able to get a decent amount of height because of the tighter curve, even though you're not able to go as far down like this. So as I said, the rounded are good for more in-between situations. They don't offer quite the stability of a flat, but they give more than a pointed would. They don't give as much precision as a pointed, but they give more than a flat one would. So it's often said that you're better off with a variety of tensioners than you are with a variety of picks, and that is true. But if you're having trouble with a particular keyway, I would look beyond just the thickness of the pick. Before you go out and just buy 15,000s, I would consider the profiles as well. When I bought these 15,000s Jimys, he had them available in both rounded and flats. I skipped the flats. I'm figuring if I have to use a 15,000s, I'm going to want the more precision and the ability to work around warding that the rounded offer as opposed to where flats can go. but other people may have different experience with that. What I have here are 4 different brands of picks in 3 different thicknesses. So this tool, also the same as Covert Instruments and this Jimy Longs. One is 25 thousandths and the other is 15 thousandths. So as far as percentage goes, that's a fair bit of difference. But as far as how much room it actually takes up in the keyway, it's not as drastic as it's often made out to be. I'm not saying it doesn't have an impact, just that it's not as much as what profiles can be. At least that's my opinion. So if we ignore the bottom 2 lines for now, but these top 4 lines are these top 4 picks. I won't be able to make a direct comparison between all of these because only 2 of them have the same profile. Covert Instruments doesn't sell individual picks, and I'm not aware of sets that include like a full range of rounds or a full range of flats, etc. But these other 3 brands have ranges from 1 through 4. They'll have different names, but I find it easier just to go with numbers so we can do a direct comparison. Where number 1 is a fairly short hook and number 4 is a deep one. So all of these are number 2s. But the tool / Covert Instruments is a round, Jimy Longs is a round, the Sparrows is a monkey paw, and the Moki is a pointed. These are the only ones where I have all of the same number, where the distance between the top of the shaft and the top of the point is all pretty similar. There's a slightly longer distance for the Covert Instruments compared to Jimy Longs, but a number 1 is going to be too short and a number 3 will be too tall. So these end up being the closest for comparison. What I did was take 4 measurements. There's the thickness and then different dimensions of the profile. So the tip width, I measured across the tip with a caliper at the point that the radius of the curve stops. So in the case of the tool Covert Instruments one, it's going to be right about there. For the monkey paw, it'll be right about there. And then the shaft height behind the tip, I measured the height of the shaft at the point where the radius in the bottom of the pick flattens out onto the flat of the shaft. For the Covert Instruments, it's about here. The Jimy Longs, right about there. And then the shaft height again at 30 millimeters back. And I chose that number using an NASA 700. It's 7 pins. This is about as deep as you're gonna usually get. So I placed the tip of the pick on the tip of the 7 pin and measured out to the face of the lock, because that's where the shaft of the pick will still be interacting with the warding. If we put the tip pick on number 7, right about there. So the warding can still interfere with pick movement at that point. Luckily, this warding is pretty wide open. But if we were going in at a similar depth on one like this, you can see where the shaft can interfere with how we can twist. Whereas one that is not as tall, we have a little more flexibility as far as rotating goes. There are definitely benefits to having the tall shaft. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. So Jimy did strength analysis on his profiles for the picks, and that's why he has the sloping shoulders. Sharp edges like this cause stress risers. So both Covert Instruments and Sparrows, multi-pick also has this limitation. Even if they use good steel, it does weaken the pick. Whereas you can still have fairly short shaft at that point and have sloping shoulders, which eliminates the stress risers. That's one of the reasons why I like Moki's design so much. So even though the short height on the Covert Instruments or tool picks are very useful for navigating the keyways, there is a drawback to them, and that is strength. If we put a ruler underneath the bottom, you can see that the ruler butts up perfectly against the bottom of the pick. So there's no real bend to it. The Covert Instruments, you see that there is a bit of a gap. All of mine have developed that. A little bit there. And with the half diamond, it's the most noticeable. So I have not broken or outright bent a pick into an unusable form, but these have taken a bit of a warp just from use. This is the first set I bought. These have seen the most use. But even though this is thicker at 25 thousandths and this at 20 thousandths, The slight difference in shaft height may have helped keep the Sparrows from warping. They have the same shoulders. But because these haven't had the same number of hours on them, it's hard to say. Even my number 4, which is my most used Sparrow, and I've even modified the tip so it's no longer a monkey paw, more kind of reverse gem sort of thing. That one does not have a bend. And this is where the design like Jimy Longs really shines. I haven't even used this, so can't do a direct comparison as far as usage goes, but I do trust Jimy's analysis that he's posted on his weblog. There is some similarity between the Jimy Longs and the Sparrows as far as mid-shaft height, but the Jimys are a little bit shorter down at the end and quite a bit taller at the shoulders. And then there's a drastic difference between the Jimys and the Tool and Covert Instruments. Just as full disclosure, I have bent one pick, but it's this custom pick I made out of a cheap stainless steel kitchen knife. And where I bent it, I accidentally got it down to 10,000ths. So this is a very thin pick. It's not meant to be used. I just decided to try it out, and yeah, didn't work quite as I hoped. Looks nice for a first pick though. So for the rest of these numbers, we can't do direct comparisons between brands other than Covert Instruments and Jimy Longs, because the type of tip profile will affect not only the distance across it, but the height of the shaft at that point. As we see between the pointed number 4 and flat number 4 of Moki. So same brand, the tip is obviously much narrower on the pointed, but the height is also shorter, as we can see here. So we cannot compare the tips between brands because they're all different, either round, monkey paw, pointed. However, at the 30mm within the brand, they're consistent. So all the Mokis, whether it's pointed or flat, 1, 2, 3, or 4, they're all about 2.75. Sparrows, it's hard to say. Not only do they have a bunch of different profiles, but they have different lines. So I can't say between those. From what I've seen of the Jimys, they're all the same at that point, and same with all the Covert Instruments. So not only brand will influence the shape of the pick, but the profile you choose within the brand. And I think that is one of the most important aspects as far as successfully navigating tight keyways. I've had very little trouble with most keyways with the Tool Necessary 9 set, which is the same as Covert Instruments. It may not offer the same strength that Jimy's or Moki's offer, but the short height helps a lot because you can turn within the keyway, which I believe is very important for finding an appropriate place to place your pick. So if we look at the tip designs, you'll see there's a small difference in height between the Covert Instruments and Jimy Longs. So they'll have about the same amount of success as far as navigating the tip through the lock. The Sparrows monkey paw has some of the worst numbers in terms of navigation, but some of the best as far as strength goes. It has the widest tip in addition to having the notch, and it has the tallest height of the shaft behind the tip. And it has the second tallest shaft length at 30mm. It's even taller than the Moki. So even though Moki has the sloped shoulders at 30mm, it hasn't started to bloom out yet. So here it's actually about 1/10 of a millimeter shorter than the Sparrows. And even the flat tip just behind the hook, that's a fair bit shorter than the monkey paw. So the Moki will be more maneuverable than Sparrows. And the shaft is stronger because of the sloped shoulders. I think the Jimys are great, but the height of the shaft at this point might hinder navigation in some tight keyways. Look at the Moki pointed, has the best on everything but shaft height at the 30mm. That has the second best number. So if you have a tight, difficult keyway to navigate and the pick you're using isn't working well, take a look at both the shaft and the tip profile before you go out and buy thinner picks. I myself, I did buy the 15,000 Jimy rounds, and I don't regret that at all, especially at the prices that Jimy offers these at. I'm glad I have them just in case, but I have not needed them yet. And now that I have the Moki pointed, I don't think there's going to be too many locks I'm going to come across that these won't be able to handle. I mean, look at the tip of that. I really don't think shaving off 5,000ths of an inch would make a noticeable difference. These two are the same thickness, and if I were having trouble in a keyway with this, I would go to the 20 thousandths pointed first, and only if that didn't work would I fall back to the 15 thousandths. Now, admittedly, I haven't picked all that many locks. I have been able to get to black belt, but I don't have anywhere near the experience of a lot of these other guys like George Jim, Yabende, Retep. But based on the experience I do have, this is my assessment. There are a number of different keyways that can be considered difficult. Some of them appear difficult because they have a lot going on as far as ledges and squiggles and whatnot. This is a Goal Z. It looks a little intimidating with these narrow cuts here at the top that go back and forth a bit. There's a few fine ledges down here, but that is a pretty open space, and this can be picked with a 25 thousandths. There's an Asa keyway, a lot of jaggies, but there's a fairly clear path from this shelf right here up to the bottom of the key pins. So this can also be picked with 25 thousandths without rubbing on the sides. And then we have one of the most complained about keyways, the Yale. There's a few different versions of it. This one's on the Yale 500. This is 500 plus. This is Avis. And this is just a PPG branded. They all have a very similar shape with some slight variation to it. And those also can all be picked with 25 thousandths. This is the Yale 500. Has the common Yale keyway, one version of it. And as you can see, the key pins are resting on this first ledge of the warding, but there's what people often call holes in the warding. So they're not large enough to allow the key pin to fall all the way down to the next ledge, but it does expose the bottom of the key pin. So we were able to interact with the key pin from below, like so. For a lock like this, what I usually do is start from the base. Simply go through and pick whatever is binding. You can use the medium round, but I'm more likely to use the shorter flat. I did modify the tip somewhat. Just trying an experiment. Ends up a little bit like a monkey paw, but I'm not terribly happy with that. But I'll probably take more of this edge off to kind of make it more of a pointed. But the tip is still about the same height, so. But as you can see, there's plenty of room for a 25 thousandths. So I would go through and do as much work as I can from the base. Move over to the right, rotate up. Now from here, you can work your way to the front. The pins will ride up over the tip. So even though it would be difficult to reinsert now, because butting up against any key pins that fall back down, which they should, because hopefully they're not overset. But I can work on whatever one I'm under, pull back. You just heard the pin I was under fall down. Now I can work on the next one if it's binding. So just keep pulling back until you find resistance, and that's the one that's binding. And I'll probably have to move up like this to get under it, and then you'll push up. If you have zero lifts, that might not be the best approach. If that's the case, you can work on any other pins from here. You can still feel the binders. you're rubbing on the tip that's sticking through the ledge. So you find whichever one, and then you can rotate left like this, which will push them up. Or you can pull back against and use this wall to leverage the pick to go right. And because the tip, so it's going to be further in, but this lets me demonstrate it. So the tip is now against the right wall, but because it's hitting it at an angle, it's twisting it to the left. And if you're lined up with one of the holes, doing so, twist it to the left and raise up on the key pin. As it twists, you're going to get less traction on this left wall. If you want to make things a little bit easier, in addition to the turner you have on the top, so in this case a 40 will fit in the top, a 50 won't fit down below. What's left is a 30, and sometimes just that little bit of extra can give you what you need to get the leverage to get the pin up. We could place it like this. It won't stay there on its own, but what's working on what is now this top ledge. So if you're able to keep the turner in position like that, that ledge will allow you to still use left wall as leverage while the pick turns like this, and it will keep it elevated, and so the pick won't slip down to the bottom. So that'll let you get around zero lifts if using this right ledge will cause an overset. Since this tensioner doesn't require any tension, you just want it to kind of sit there in position. Depending on what your setup's like, you could put like a rubber band around it and this part of the vise, and it would just hold it there because it doesn't have to be tight or anything like that. That way you don't have to keep your hand on it, and you can just work the tensioner up top, and it'll just stay there like that. Using a half diamond is very popular in these Yale style keyways. It's handy because it's got the ramp on the front as well, so you don't have to get it to the back. You can use it from the front and have an easier time of getting the key pins up. I find it works a bit better also as with the twist dynamics. And then we have the Abyss. This one is interesting. The 500 is a blue belt, and this Abyss is orange. However, where the 500 has holes in the warding, this does not. Same basic keyway shape. The key pins are riding up higher on the ledge. So the taper of the left side of the key pin is riding on the slope of the warding. There are slight cutouts on it, so the key pin is nestled into the warding a little bit, but only the very right edge is exposed to the underside. So even though there's plenty of room here to work, we can't find a spot where we can just lift the tip of the pick straight up and find the pin. Right there, if it was the 500, I'd be lifting up on the key pin, but I'm just meeting the hard resistance of this warding ledge. You can tickle key pin from here. It's a little bit tight, but we are able to lift it. Trying to lift the tip of the pick where the warding is whole, it will end up binding up. So this can give the illusion that 25 thousandths won't work. But if you're aligned underneath the pin, there's just enough cutaway there that we can use this 25 thousandths to lift the key pin. And if you find the right angle and you're at the right depth, you're not rubbing the warding too much to dull feedback. It is a little bit trickier though. The nice thing is it has raised the key pins up enough that we can fit a pick a little bit easier onto this right warding. And now we can pull through. If we feel a binder, lift up, get under it, and push. Now we run into the same issue where if there are 0 lifts up front, just lifting up like that, I'm lifting the front pin. So that may cause oversets. So if you don't run into issues like that, do the same thing as we did with the other one. Here's a link to a video where I pick and gut the L500 using the techniques I talk about in this video. Thanks for watching. I hope you found something useful, and I will catch you next time.